Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. Today's program dispels vaccine, dis, and misinformation narratives. The San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefings are supported by a grant from MetaFund. Thank you. The important and ongoing work of the San Francisco Interfaith Council would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter. And subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our previous virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. As COVID-19 case rates slowly climb, now is the ideal time for San Franciscans to prepare for changes in the virus by taking basic actions that protect themselves, their families, and their community. The San Francisco Department of Public Health urges people to be ready for COVID by staying up to date on their vaccinations, knowing how to reach a doctor, keeping a supply of rapid COVID tests, keep masks handy, plan ahead for possible infection, and stay informed with trusted sources of information such as sf.gov/COVID. With changes in federal, state, and city masking guidelines, it can be difficult to know when to mask. The best advice is to bring a mask with you everywhere you go, as you may be required by the organization, business, or transportation agency to wear one. The vaccines are safe and effective. Go to sf.gov to find a vaccine site or vaccine event in your neighborhood. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco. Together we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. The California Department of Public Health's Vaccinate ALL 58 Trust Safety team aims to provide Californians with accurate and timely information about the COVID-19 vaccines so that they can make informed decisions about their health. They do this by identifying, understanding, and combating the mis- and disinformation narratives circulating about COVID-19 vaccines that could be impacting vaccine hesitancy across the state. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council, will feature a presentation by the Trust and Safety team, which will provide a brief overview of the team before diving into several recent English and Spanish misinformation narratives about COVID-19 vaccines identified in recent reporting. To close, the team will share ways faith-based partners can get involved in these efforts and stay connected with the California Department of Public Health's Vaccinate ALL 58 Trust and Safety team. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Nancy Nielsen.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to everyone for being here today. As Michael may mention, this is our 80th presentation during this period of challenge. At all of our gatherings, we remind ourselves and our visitors, this is an interfaith community Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world.
Thank you, Nancy. At this time, to ground us in a reflective moment, we have a San Francisco Interfaith Council board member, Reverend Dr. Jonathan Butler. He wears so many more hats than that. He is the executive director of the San Francisco African American Faith-Based Coalition. He is an assistant professional researcher at UCSF Department of Family and Community Medicine. And he's the education ministry minister at Third Baptist Church. Reverend Dr. Butler, we are so pleased to have you with us. We know you're no stranger to this program, but we would invite you at this time to ground us in that reflective moment.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas, and greetings to everyone this morning. Grateful for the opportunity to be able to share. I want to start off by saying that I have 3 different degrees, one in marketing, one in theology, and one in medical sociology. And this is the rare time where I'm able to utilize all of my degrees. So I'm excited to make sure that, you know, my mom is happy in knowing that all these 3 degrees, you know, do work together. So I want to start off with my theology, religious, pastoral hat and open up a reflective moment that I had actually this morning, found in Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, when it says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks, receive, the one who seeks, finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open." Now, Walter Brueggemann opened up in one of his reflections by saying, we do thoughts and prayers easily. We do thoughts without thinking. We do prayers without praying. We commit that act so fluently with no sincerity because it's what we know how to do, because we'd rather not do anything else or do anything more, or because it's just convenient. It costs us nothing. Now, however, we have endured almost 3 years of this pandemic, and we are driven to unthinkable thoughts about all that is ending and all that we have lost in the pandemic, even our loss of loved ones, as we reflect on the events that have occurred in the past regarding racism and hate. All that leaves us with a sinking feeling. Now, however, we are driven, some of us, to unutterable prayers. We are driven to such prayer by awareness that our usual reliabilities are gone. And so we are driven to the abiding God when other helpers fail, when national governments don't pass gun legislation, when we place bandages over the wounds of racism and injustice, and when comforts flee, the comfort of going to the grocery store and walking or jogging in the park, driving in the car, the comfort of just sitting on your own couch. And after all of that we have had to endure as a people throughout the years and decades, we still have the audacity and the boldness to pray. And we are bold enough to ask because we believe that it will be given, that we seek prayer for the ending of this virus, for the health of our neighborhood, for the recovery of the economy, that God will heal our land, that God will repair our communities, that God will address homelessness. We seek prayer. We are bold enough to seek because we believe that God will be found, that we seek God's mercy, we seek God's goodness, and we seek God's generosity. So we seek God in the midst of all of the chaos that we have to encounter, that we are not also bold enough to ask and seek, but also bold enough to knock because it will be open. We know that many doors have been slammed shut in our faces, doors of health and safety and comfort and fun. So we pray to this God. In the midst of our pain and the predicaments that we face, we pray to a God to open to us the door of abundant life and love and peace and joy. We dare to pray, not because we are at our wits' ends, but because God is at the center of our life. Our hope is in God alone. So hear, heal, save, and restore, God. Be the God you have promised us to be. Amen. Now I want to put on my marketing hat. As we prepare for our presenters today, I'd like to actually acknowledge that I have just recently had a paper published around COVID vaccination readiness among racial and ethnic groups in San Francisco. It's a qualitative analysis, and hopefully some of the excerpts from this paper that is recently published will help to ground us in the conversation that we will have from our presenters. In the paper, we talked about how a vaccination requires both the individual and health system readiness. And this is my research hat. The concept framework of readiness has been proposed among my colleagues as an alternative to the often used framework of vaccine hesitancy, because the hesitancy framework, it unduly blames the individual for the inequities that are largely manifestations of systemic problems. And so I want to propose this readiness framework, which recognizes both the individual in making an informed decision about readiness for vaccination and the role the health system has in dismantling access barriers to vaccination and proactively addressing the needs of the social marginalized groups. So as it pertains to misinformation and disinformation, as we will talk about today, in my paper, we talked about this, and we found that many individuals from African Americans, Latinx, and our Asian American brothers and sisters had concerns about vaccine safety and efficacy stemming from challenges in accessing and just sorting through all of the information and the confusion about ongoing scientific uncertainties, as well as due to receiving misinformation about vaccines. Concerns about the vaccine included, how well the vaccine protects against the variants of the virus, as we all know. What are the long-term effects of this virus? How individuals with specific medical conditions may react to the virus? That production and safety testing they found were rushed, and that vaccine may only protect us for a short period. So there were information challenges. Participants in this particular study commented about just the overload of information, presenting a challenge for individuals to look for trustworthy and evidence-based information, and the need for more concise information in a person's preferred language that is without all of that technical jargon that we oftentimes use in the scientific field. One person stated that you can't just put things out on people and say, this is great for you, and assume that they're always going to agree with you. That wouldn't be a human nature. It just needs to be more clear, more concise, and delivered in a way that even little kids can understand. There was comment around misinformation and knowledge gaps that interacted with long-standing justified skepticism among community of colors about the trustworthiness of health and government institutions rooted in systemic racism and anti-immigrant policies. And so as recommendations, I want to offer, our group recognize that it is important for us to recognize the historical underpinnings of mistrust of public health efforts and actively work to dismantle this systemic racism in healthcare and research practices. And then we also recommended, as a result of sort of helping with this disinformation and misinformation, we also recommended that we center outreach campaigns on the voices and perspectives of trusted messengers who have deep roots and are visible within the community, i.e. our faith leaders. And then lastly, we recommend that we promote positive vaccination messaging about protecting the family and the community, reconnecting with friends and family, and safely returning to work. So I hope these particular recommendations that were found in our study, again, that was recently published, that will help inform ways to improve how we want to make sure that people are ready, and not necessarily the fact that they're hesitant, but we want to get them ready to be able to take that vaccination. And it does require the responsibility of the healthcare system as well as the individual. So thank you for this time and opportunity.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Butler. I can't think of a better introduction to our guests than what you just shared. Thank you very much for always being there for us, but also challenging us and positing thoughts that we need to be conscious of. And I think that you probably have done that not only for me, but also for our guest presenters today. God bless you. This past week, this Saturday, I was sitting on a park bench in Point Reyes Station and noticed that the flag was at half mast. And I turned to the friends I was with, and we discovered that it was at half mast because 1 million people had died of COVID-19. And it was a stark reminder of the impact that this virus has had on our nation and on our world, certainly our state and our city. We have two phenomenal presenters today. I heard them just a couple of weeks ago. Governor Newsom has been very sensitive to engaging faith leaders since the outset of the pandemic. And I heard them in a recent briefing, and I said, their words can't be just heard in a vacuum of maybe a couple of dozen of us, but need to be shared. And so with that, I welcome Maddie Claff, who is here with us in San Francisco, and Tom Ravelli, who is with us from Washington, D.C., to speak to the issue of vaccine mis and disinformation. Maddie and Tom, you are here with family now, and we would invite you to really share with us your thoughts and what you shared with the faith leaders throughout the state regarding this issue, and take the time that you need.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for providing us with this opportunity. So hi, everyone. My name is Maddie Claff, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Tom Ravelli. And the two of us are part of the California Department of Public Health Vaccinate ALL 58 Trust and Safety team. So today we'll provide you all with a brief overview of our team and the work that we do. And we'll share some high-level details around some of the recent COVID-19 vaccine narratives that we've seen circulating in both English and Spanish. So perfect, you got the slide deck pulled up. We can go ahead and flip to the next slide there. Perfect. So for some background around our team, I know Michael alluded to this, but we are part of the Vaccinate ALL 58 campaign, which is the California Department of Public Health's COVID-19 vaccination campaign. And our team works to identify misinformation as well as the public narratives or rumors that are circulating about the COVID-19 vaccines that could be impacting vaccine acceptance across the state. And overall, our mission is to help Californians get access to accurate and timely information about the COVID-19 vaccines in the efforts to reduce vaccine hesitancy. So in terms of our structure, our team is broken down into two parts. So we have the sensing and analysis side of the house, which is where Tom sits. And that side monitors public social media platforms and then develops detailed reports about the trends and the narratives that they're seeing that may impact vaccine hesitancy across the state. And then there's partnerships, which is where I fall under. And we engage with partners like yourselves to share out the word on what we're seeing, as well as the trusted resources and tools to help address questions that the public may have. And then just in terms of outcomes, we produce detailed reports that cover the top narratives relating to the COVID-19 vaccines. And we also develop productive partnerships and share out resources and information to help our partners respond to questions about the COVID-19 vaccines that folks in California are likely to have. And this just allows us to all a better position to successfully vaccinate all 58 counties throughout the state. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Tom to share some high-level details around the narratives we've seen recently.
All right, thanks so much, Maddie. And it's a real pleasure to be with you all this morning. We get to do a lot of these briefings internally, but it's really great to be able to speak with leaders of the faith community to communicate some of the information that we're finding. So as Maddie mentioned, to begin with, we wanted to kind of highlight 3 COVID-19 vaccine rumors or misinformation narratives that we've recently observed on social media and reported out as part of our work. And this first narrative, which we have up on the slide here, was detected on social media through our social media queries focused on the sort of broad, enduring topics of vaccines in children and vaccine adverse reactions. And this narrative essentially argues that COVID-19 vaccines cause immunodeficiencies that are responsible for the recent spate of severe liver infections in children. As I'm sure you all know, we're in the midst of an outbreak of hepatitis or hepatitis-like liver infections among children in the US, in the UK, and in several dozen or in a dozen or more other countries, I should say. And the jury is still out as to what is causing these infections. Some experts are pointing to an adenovirus, saying some are saying it's some other virus. Initially, these infections were thought to be a form of hepatitis. It's not clear if that's the case anymore. There's some speculation that these infections may be linked to past COVID-19 infection, although again, that is still far from certain. And in response to this, we've seen in English and Spanish, vaccine critical social media users really gravitate to this story. They're claiming that the vaccine weakens immune systems and livers of recipients, particularly children, rendering them susceptible to these infections. Now, the problem with this claim, of course, is that few, if any, of the children suffering from these mystery liver infections have actually had COVID-19 vaccines, in part because many of them are just simply too young to get the vaccine. Many vaccine critical social media users have responded by simply saying that health authorities are lying. These kids were vaccinated and health authorities are now covering it up. Or possibly that these children's parents were overzealous and got them vaccinated when they were not in an age group that was approved for vaccination. And now the parents are lying and covering up their vaccine status. And as this story evolved over time, we also started seeing people start to claim that the COVID vaccine was being transmitted to infants from their mothers via breastfeeding, or in the case of older children, that vaccinated members of their households were shedding the vaccine and transmitting it to these children, kind of as you would a common cold in your own house. Now, these claims are obviously not grounded in any real scientific research, but again, because the cause and the origin of these pediatric liver infections are still very unclear, we expect to continue to see a lot of speculation and attempts to link these infections to the vaccine. And for context, we're providing some information here from trusted medical resources regarding kind of the overall situation with children's COVID-19 vaccination. As we know, the American Academy of Pediatrics does recommend COVID-19 vaccination for all children and adolescents 5 and older. And the CDC has affirmed that ongoing safety monitoring shows that COVID vaccination continues to be safe for children, that reported side effects tend to be mild and temporary, and that serious reactions to the COVID vaccination among children are rare. And then lastly, in the bottom right corner of the screen, we've provided some helpful links that provide additional resources about the COVID-19 vaccine in children and safety issues related to vaccination for children. And we can jump to the second slide, which is our second narrative. And here, the second narrative we wanted to share with you all this morning falls within our broader topic of reproductive adverse reactions to the COVID-19 vaccine. And the claim here is that the introduction of COVID-19 vaccines have either directly caused or somehow correlated with a 2,000% increase in miscarriages in the US. And this claim actually originates from a recent video produced by a California-based physician affiliated with the vaccine critical activist group, America's Frontline Doctors. Some of you may be familiar with this group. This physician arrived at his 2000% number via some very dubious arithmetic interpreting reports on the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS, which for those of you who don't know is an open access online repository where people can report adverse side effects to vaccines. And this claim has not been corroborated by a credible source. It is totally speculative on this particular individual's part. Nevertheless, this physician's video has generated tens of thousands of views online. At this point, it's probably hundreds of thousands of views. And his claim has been amplified and repeated as fact by many individuals on social media, both in English and in Spanish. And as we've noted on the bottom section of the slide, the CDC has not found any evidence that COVID vaccine causes fertility problems. The CDC does continue to recommend vaccination for those who are pregnant or trying to become pregnant and for their partners. And similarly, the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists states that claims linking COVID vaccines to infertility are not supported by any scientific evidence. And then as before, we've shared some links here in the bottom right corner of the screen to useful trusted resources relating to this topic. And for our last narrative for today, this narrative was detected within our broader vaccines are unnecessary and ineffective topic, which we perpetually monitor online. And the core claim here is that new waves of COVID infections, particularly in high vaccination territories and countries such as Hong Kong and South Korea, are proof that COVID vaccines and other preventative measures just simply do not work. In connection with this narrative, we observed many social media users argue that aggressive zero COVID policies that are in place in some of these countries are ultimately counterproductive because they do not let populations develop herd immunity, and they force public health to be dependent on the protection of what are portrayed as weak and ineffective vaccines. And many individuals also assert that vaccine first policies, such as those adopted by the US and in most other countries, will leave populations perpetually vulnerable, such that it's just a matter of time before they're totally overwhelmed by some new COVID variant. And in response to this narrative, we note that the CDC affirms that COVID vaccines are effective at preventing serious infection and death. And in addition, the CDC recognizes that, like other vaccines, the COVID vaccine is not 100% effective and breakthrough infections are expected. The CDC continuously collects data on vaccine breakthrough infections and closely monitors the safety and effectiveness of COVID vaccines. And per the CDC, research shows that fully vaccinated people with breakthrough infections tend to be less likely to develop serious illness as opposed to those who are unvaccinated and end up getting COVID-19. And then finally, in our last slide, we wanted to just kind of take a step back and give you a high-level overview of some of the most common types of narratives and claims and arguments that we see crop up over and over in our work. These buckets of narratives kind of run the gamut from very obvious misinformation and claims that are demonstrably false to speculation about scientific issues about which there's still a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity. So for example, we see a lot of arguments and claims that natural immunity derived from previous infection is just universally superior to COVID vaccination. Now, again, there are still open questions about the significance and effectiveness of natural immunity, but we start to get concerned when people make broad assertions and implications that everyone should just go out and get COVID and no one should bother getting vaccinated because they'll end up having better protection from natural immunity at the end of the day. Similarly, we see a lot of claims that kids just don't need to be vaccinated because pediatric COVID cases are just not that serious, and there's no need for children to be vaccinated. We also see the kind of apathetic kind of argument that says that COVID vaccines are just going to get less and less effective against forthcoming variants. So there's just no point in getting vaccinated. People will be getting boosters for the rest of their lives, and it's all just kind of silly and pointless. That's a very common refrain that we hear. And then we also see many claims that COVID vaccines cause dangerous side effects, especially heart conditions in minors and infertility in women. And we flagged a few of these narratives for you all today. And then finally, we see claims that alternative treatments such as ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, various other combinations of drugs and vitamin supplements are safer and more effective than COVID-19 vaccines. That's a common refrain as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Maddie to wrap up this section of our prepared briefing.
Thanks so much, Tom, for walking us through those narratives. Before we close, we also just want to emphasize that our partners like yourselves play a huge role in our efforts to combat misinformation. Faith leaders are some of the most highly regarded trusted messengers within communities. So as trusted messengers, we look to you all to share out reliable information about the COVID-19 vaccines across your channels, your platforms, and within your communities. Lastly, we have established a rumors inbox, which serves as a tip line for our partners to submit any potential rumors that they're hearing about the COVID-19 vaccines with our team. And this just allows us to have a better understanding of what the public actually has questions about. So that being said, if you come across any rumors or conflicting information about the COVID-19 vaccines that doesn't seem to align with what you're hearing from authoritative sources such as the CDC, CDPH, et cetera, please send it over to our team at rumors@cdph.ca.gov. So that is it from us. Thank you again, Michael, for this opportunity. Happy to open it up now to any questions.
Thank you so much. This was very, very helpful and much appreciated the scenarios you presented. We have a number of questions to ask you, but to the attendees on the line today, if anything you heard struck a chord or there are things that you're hearing out in the field that you would like to share in terms of in the form of a question to get clarity, please put that in the chat to Q&A, and time permitting, we will get to all the questions. I guess the first question I want to ask is, if you gave us a number of scenarios and things that we should be aware of. How can you tell if something is misinformation?
I could jump in and take that one, Maddie. So we have a couple of kind of guidelines that we follow to try to figure out when something crosses the line from being just kind of a rumor or an opinion based on an unclear situation and really crosses that line into the realm of misinformation. And one of the main indicators is that you'll be seeing something that is kind of coming out of the blue. It's either not referencing any not referencing any sources at all, or it's referencing very obscure sources and the information is really conflicting with what authoritative known scientific sources say. That's a big one. Another one is exaggerations, people who are taking, situations that are complicated and nuanced and making broad generalized claims, something like, everyone who gets a booster ends up in bed for days before they recover, or everyone who gets the vaccine is going to end up getting COVID anyway, so there's just no point in getting vaccinated. And then we see a lot of plays on emotion, people posting stuff online that's designed to frankly trigger feelings of fear or anger or sadness in their audience to sort of manipulate them and push them to a particular way of view. And then when you're dealing with people who are, just people on the street who may have been absorbing misinformation, you'll often find that it's very difficult to move them from their perspective. You can provide them with a lot of this sort of information from the CDC or the FDA or whatever it might be, and they're just kind of stuck and focused on their point of view. That's a clear sign that they've been really immersed in a misinformation environment. And then lastly, there's a lot of confusion about information gaps. When there's a situation that there's lack of clarity, that's an environment where misinformation can really thrive, where actors who promote misinformation can really take advantage. And that's exactly what we saw with the first narrative that we shared about the evolving situation with the children's liver infections. There are unknown questions, and purveyors of misinformation can take advantage of that.
I guess a follow-up question to that would be, what are some of the consequences of misinformation?
And Tom, if you want to hit on that, but I can speak to this a little bit. So misinformation can really cloud judgment. It can spark distrust in authoritative sources that are pushing out trusted information. It can also, at the end of the day, invalidate government and public health organizations and institutions that are working to share out the latest trusted information. And then when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines in particular, which is obviously our area of focus, it has raised a lot of questions around, as Tom was mentioning earlier, the safety, the efficacy of the vaccines. And so these anti-vaccine narratives or claims that, COVID-19 vaccines have caused adverse reactions or contain toxic materials, et cetera, these broad misinformation claims that aren't based on trusted information can really influence vaccine hesitancy across the state, across the country, and even broader. And so this can just in general cause distrust. And it also, we've seen it turn in from just being online misinformation to offline action. So in the vaccine space, we've seen protests, we've seen violence against those that are working to share out what they know, violence against trusted messengers, doctors, et cetera. So it's, it can definitely, it's not just happening online, it can also play out in real world action as well.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we see kind of knock-on effects that aren't related to, that aren't necessarily directly related to public health. You can have a kid who has to get a vaccine to go back to college, and he's being influenced by some of this misinformation. If he decides not to get the vaccine, he may not end up going back to college, and that could, drastically alter his life. Or you could have, a family who has just had a child and the grandmother won't get vaccinated. So she, the new parents say, well, you can't see your grandchild until you're vaccinated. It can divide families. So there are knock-on effects beyond just, people not getting vaccinated and getting sick from COVID. There are broader societal effects as well.
How should you approach some? I mean, Tom, you had mentioned some people, once they get an idea in their head, they're immovable, let's say. How should you approach someone who has clearly been influenced by misinformation?
So it's very important to always try to drive people back towards trusted sources of information. But the messenger is very important. Just having someone like Anthony Fauci wagging their finger at someone on TV, people who are influenced by this kind of information, that's just going to turn them off even more. And that's where I think leaders of, faith leaders, community leaders are so important, because at the end of the day, these are human beings and they need to be treated with respect and dignity. And when you approach them honestly and honestly try to share positive information with them, they are much more receptive. And I think I remember reading a study a couple of years back about getting people out of the QAnon movement. And what the study found was that it just takes that one part of their belief system, that one individual belief. If you can prompt them to question that one belief, then suddenly they start to question that whole belief structure. So really, it's a matter of just getting to people at the right time and presenting them information with a messenger who doesn't, patronize them or dismiss them as being stupid or foolish for not getting vaccinated.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Tom mentioned it, but it's really important to use an empathy-based approach. Misinformation is out there. It's spreading faster than ever, and it's really easy to be influenced by it. So that's really important to remember when you're engaging in conversations with your community and you're encountering someone that clearly has been influenced by misinformation, to approach them as a human being and understand where they're coming from and hear their point of view. And then rather than just saying, you're wrong, listen to the CDC, come at them with, an empathetic based approach, understand where they're coming from, and then try to work with them one-on-one. We found one-on-one conversations are really effective versus just, pushing out broadly a certain message. So it'll take some time. It's not going to happen right away. And at the end of the day, it's really up to them to make the decision. You really can't force anyone to do anything. So you just have to, speak with them, work with them, and then ultimately it'll be up to them to make their decision that they believe is right for them.
Thank you. These times in which we live, I'm old enough to remember when there were, 4 networks, and there was some objectivity in the presentation of the news. And now people go to the stations that make them feel good or resonate with their own belief systems. A question I have for you is, how do you navigate gaps in information?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. And while we do know that, the CDC, the FDA, CDPH remain some of the most reliable and reputable and trustworthy sources for information about COVID-19 and COVID efficacy, there's just a wealth of information outside of these sources. So it's just really important when you're engaging in outreach efforts to focus on accurate information, reliable resources, trusted sources as you engage with the community. And we caution against sharing any information that you just don't know where it's coming from. You don't know what the motives are of the person who is presenting this information, because that kind of opens up opportunities for purveyors of misinformation to seed their narratives in the community.
Thank you. We're starting to get some questions in from our attendees, and I'd like to pose them to you. From Father Michael Hurley, what challenges do you see with addressing rumors in vulnerable communities?
There are a lot of challenges. I mean, it goes back to the gaps in information where people will hear something and they're predisposed to be afraid or hesitant for all the reasons that that we've discussed, because of history of especially communities of color, minority communities being adversely affected by public health and pharmaceutical companies. So it's very challenging to deal with those narratives that are spreading that really play on emotion. And again, the best way to sort of counteract that is to approach these narratives with kind of an empathetic approach, where you're combating just a raw emotional an input that's causing a raw emotional reaction with a human and sincere response.
Dr. Butler offers this thought, and I'd be curious as to your reaction. A new perspective published in a leading scientific journal yesterday: physicians spreading misinformation on social media. Do right and wrong answers still exist in medicine? The American Board of Internal Medicine has informed doctors that disseminating misinformation is grounds for disciplinary actions. Your response?
That's certainly, it is certainly a tough situation, because it is a fluid situation. Many doctors are themselves subject to this kind of misinformation, and they become invested in a lot of these narratives, especially around things like ivermectin or the theories that big pharma is just trying to make money by selling these vaccines to the government that are being foisted on people. So I agree, it's certainly challenging. The doctors are not immune from a lot of these narratives that are coming in through the internet.
We have from Joy Barnett a good question. How do you alleviate concerns about too rapid vaccine development?
That's a good one. You wanna take that one, Maddie?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we are not medical experts by any means. So when we are, sharing out our trusted information, it's pulled directly from trusted sources, such as the CDC, CDPH, et cetera. So my response to that would be, according to the CDC, we've gotten this narrative a lot, actually. We've seen it come up a decent amount, but according to the CDC, what we know on their website is that, they've had decades of research that's gone into mRNA vaccines, that's gone into vaccine development prior to the COVID-19 vaccines. And so that decades of research has, allowed these vaccines to become supplied, as rapidly as they were. So again, I would just point back to what is shared on trusted sources when answering questions that may come up from your community about, questions about the vaccine or concerns that they may have.
You're speaking to a unique audience today. You're speaking to faith leaders, and our houses of worship and religious institutions really are hubs for some of the most vulnerable people for whom English is not their first language, people who are coming and receiving love and feeling valued and they're safe. And so, yes, our faith leaders and religious institution leaders are trusted messengers. In this final question to you, what can we do as trusted messengers in the community to slow the spread of misinformation?
Apologies, there's a printer going off behind me, so if you hear some background noise. But you're exactly right. I mean, this audience is so important to our mission and to just communicating with communities. You all are, on the ground interacting with these communities that may be susceptible to mis and disinformation that's spreading. So we really encourage you all to use your platforms, use your role within the community as a trusted messenger to share out the trusted information that we have about the vaccines and work with those people that may come to you with questions or concerns about the vaccines or about other topics as well. And so, as I also mentioned, you all, obviously there's a lot of questions that you all may have and may not have the answers to, and that's certainly okay. We want to be a resource for each and every one of you as well. So I know I mentioned it and I actually have it here as well, but you can report any of the mis and disinformation narratives that you're hearing within your conversations, or even online if you come across something and you're like, that seems a little off to me. You can certainly send it over to our team at the rumors inbox, which is rumors@cdph.ca.gov. And we would be happy to, work with you potentially on crafting a response and also incorporate that information into our reporting as well, so that, we're able to address it at a higher level within CDPH.
I want to thank you both and also give you an opportunity. A lot has been said today. Your presentation was comprehensive. The scenarios you put out there were real, and your response to these questions was most helpful. Is there any last word that you'd like to share before we close? Because we've come in under time, which is a rarity on this program, but it's been the value and not the quantity. I think that has been important today. So I'd give you this opportunity. If you had a few last minutes, you're doing this throughout the state, and if there are things you're hearing that would be of value and benefit to our attendees, this would be a good time to share.
I think I would just add, I just wanted to tag on to what Maddie said. I think faith leaders and members of the faith community are really uniquely empowered to act as kind of frontline representatives combating misinformation, because you all are able to deal with people, again, with empathy and with dignity and respect in a way that maybe they won't get when they're just reading press releases from the FDA or the CDC or whatever it might be. So you all really do have a vital role to play in coaching people and counseling people as they're grappling with these very difficult issues, issues of personal health and family health.
Maddie?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've said this a million times, but we just want to thank you all for your time today, for being on this call to listen to us. and for your work in the communities. You all play such an important role, and we really, really could not do it without you. So thank you so much.
I want to thank you both. And I want to thank Dr. Butler also for his incredible contribution today. And of course, Nancy Nielsen. Would love to thank also Cynthia Zambucas in our office, as well as Trey Russell Allen, our tech consultant, for making this possible. We're watching the numbers rise in both test positive cases as well as hospitalizations here in San Francisco. And I know that our faith leaders and their policy teams are doing as much as they can to keep those entrusted to their care protected and safe. A follow-up to this conversation will happen next week when the health officer of the city and county of San Francisco, Dr. Susan Phillip, will join us. And she's going to talk with us about the status of COVID-19 in San Francisco, including the latest case and hospitalization counts and what they mean, the city's strategy for mitigating the virus's impact on vulnerable communities, and what we can do to protect ourselves and to slow the spread. That will happen again next week, May 26th at 8:30 a.m. This brings to a close today's program. We thank you all for joining us. And we invite you to join us next week. May God keep you and may God bless you.